I thought I was by myself until I looked over here.
I've got to
I'm out on
abstain on the minutes.
Yeah.
Leslie's out on Aurelia. I'm going to call the study session to order. Roll call, please.
The record will reflect that Councilmember Daigle has an excused absence.
First item is clarification for items on the consent calendar. Councilmember Gardner.
Number 4, Mr. City Attorney, we received a letter from Mr. Diamond about the Woody's Wharf issue. Is there something there that we need to respond to, or was that something you'll handle later, or what?
There's no need to respond to it. We've already addressed all the issues he's raised in the resolution. We don't think there's any merit to the claims that he's making. So,
all right, thank you. And number 12, which is the Dover Drive area repaving, are we able to do anything in that will help our bicycle transit?
Yes, I believe we are. We're going to actually repave the street and restripe it, so we'll be looking at bike lanes as we put that on there along with the medians.
Great. And then on number 16, I notice we're spending quite a bit of money on ID badges, so I'm assuming there's more to it than that, than just a plastic ID badge.
There is. It's a whole system of creating those and clearing them through the federal folks as well. But it's more, but it's not much more. I'll tell you that much. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I'll share with you an email. I don't see Chief Poster here right now, but if you want to talk about it tonight, he's prepared to respond to that.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay.
Address?
Mr. Mayor, on item 11, that is the rehabilitation of Bayside, I was wondering what the status will be of the existing sharrows that are on there. The staff report's silent on that.
Yes, thank you. The existing sharrows will be put back on. The traffic staff's looked at even re-legending them based on what they know from Coast Highway to put them in a little better location.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Hill.
Just a comment on item number 6, the Santa Ana Heights equestrian issues. In looking at the zoning ordinances, and in particular the setbacks, I noticed that there was a 0 setback on the equestrian exercise and training areas. And that just brought to light a question that I have. I don't expect an answer this evening, but the question would be, could we work with the equestrian community to see if there was something that we could do to ensure that even without a setback, that runoff did not occur from those areas, either through some natural plantings or some kind of condition that would resolve the one complaint that seems to occur of runoff from those properties. So the question just was generated by the report. Could we look at that in the future?
Mr. Henn.
No clarification particularly, just a comment on item number 13, this GLUMAC contract to manage the Civic Center lighting and HVAC systems. It's going to cost us $120,000 for 2 years to do that. I guess it's just unfortunate that we have selected such a complicated system, or that we have such a complicated need that we're going to have special resources to do that. It will eviscerate most of the energy-saving gains from that system. I'm just hopeful that as we implement additional systems in city buildings, that we'll be able to either understand those systems better or be able to train ourselves to handle them in the ordinary course without having to incur this $120,000 for as far into the future as we can see. And I did ask staff about it. I'm satisfied with the explanation I got for now. I'm hoping that we're going to be vigilant to get past this issue as time goes by.
Mr. Silich?
I have no items.
And I have no items. So we will now go to item number 2, harbor rent look-back review for residential commercial piers and moorings.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Selich.
Yes, I need to recuse myself from this item. I own a residential dock. City attorneys advised me that I may have a conflict of interest. I've recused myself on this item in the past and will do so now.
Thank you. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is Chris Miller. I'm the Harbor Resources Manager. And this afternoon we'll be talking about harbor rents via our look-back meeting. Thank you. Just to briefly review the process, for the past about 3 years ago, the City Council reviewed all the slip rental fees or harbor fees for the Balboa Yacht Basin, the moorings, and the residential and commercial piers. During this process, earlier this year, the City Council committed to looking back at how staff implemented the process, particularly with the residential pier component of that. And that's what we're doing today. We had a series of workshops, which I'll go into in just a minute. And as a reminder, the residential pier rents were implemented in March 1st of 2013. So at the Council's direction, we had 2 workshops in late August, if I recall. And they were both an afternoon session and an evening session, very well attended. In fact, we got a lot of good, positive feedback, and we summarized all of those comments into Attachment A, which is in the staff report, and there's many pages, and the attendees were, they really wanted me to include all the comments, and they actually, I actually posted them on the internet for them to review, and if they had any clarification or feedback on the way I interpreted their comments, I could be corrected, and I was. So, on a few comments. So basically, to cut to the chase, based on those comments and the input that we received at those workshops, as well as the feedback that staff received during this entire look-back process, we're recommending the following changes. Recommended change number 1. First of all, we thought it was important to define what it is that, define the area. I don't believe we had this, well, we had it defined before, but I'm clarifying it, which would be, and I'll have visuals on the next slide. The area is defined as the footprint of the pier, gangway, and float, the interior of the U-shaped float, if one has a U-shaped float, the buffer area, which is 10 feet around the float, except for the backside, and that was an exception that the council made earlier this year. And then here's a new definition or a new area, which would be if there is less than 5 feet of usable space, then we would not charge for that. So this first slide depicts, I wanted to show you exactly what we meant when we have the outline of the pier and the gangway, and we show the buffer area on either side. As you can see in let's see, in address 1226 on the far left-hand side where my cursor is, there is a 10-foot buffer right there on that left side of the U-shaped float. But on the right side of the U-shaped float, there is not 10 feet because we hit the property line first. So the rule has been you either hit the 10 feet or you go straight to the property line. And then that example follows through with this strip of homes along the waterfront. My next slide here demonstrates that last point that I made in recommendation number 1, which is establishing a minimum for our side, the side buffer areas. And that minimum wasn't defined earlier this year. As you can see, going from left to right, there is anywhere from the maximum buffer of 10 feet to 3.5 feet to 5.5 and so on. And so one of the challenges that staff had when we were implementing the process was where to draw the line with our about 800 plus homes in the harbor. where to draw the line for a usable space or an unusable space. And certain people contacted us, and we worked out individual cases, but we didn't have a going rule as we analyzed every single property, or every single one of the 800 properties in the harbor. So this just shows you the varying dimensions here, and we're recommending a 5-foot minimum. If there's 5 or more feet, well, then we would charge for that area, feeling that a dinghy could be there, perhaps. But if there's less than 5 feet, then we wouldn't charge for that area. And so we'd have to go through our GIS folks and recalculate everything, which we're prepared to do. The second recommended change is to define what we're actually charging for. And the first bullet point says we charge for the footprint of the pier, gangway, and float over the city tidelands. And the second recommendation would be to charge 50% of the rate for the interior of the U-shaped float in the 10-foot buffer area. And to compare, we are currently charging the full rate for the buffer area in the interior U. And I have several examples which I'll go through next, which show the various configurations of docks throughout the harbor and how this would apply, just to give the council a sense. So here's an example of 3 Collins Isle. With the buffer, the existing charge, in 5 years, fully implemented, the rate would be $998. But under the proposed 50% reduction of that buffer area charge, it would bring the rate down to $744, which is a 25% reduction. You can see that the green area represents the buffer zone, as I previously discussed. A few more examples. Here is another house on Channel Road, and notice its dock is parallel to the bulkhead, meaning it goes lengthwise, to the bulkhead. And you would side tie a vessel on the outside of that. The buffer is, with the buffer, the current plan it's $675. Without, or with the proposed plan, it'd be $545, a 19% reduction. Here's another scenario of what we would call a single finger pier, or float rather. And this brings it down 31% if we were to go to the proposed recommendation. Here's another example, and this is an interesting example because it shows a couple things. It shows the single finger float, as we just saw, but it also shows where the bulkhead line is, and where my cursor is right here underneath the word bulkhead. There's a line that goes parallel to the shore. And if you notice, our green outline we do not charge for anything landward of this bulkhead line per the council's direction, meaning that area would be considered, for lack of a better term, private waterways. In other words, it would not be city tidelands. So the city tidelands start at the bulkhead and they go out bayward. And so this is an interesting graphic just to show that we are only charging the area over city tidelands. Another example of a typical pier is the U-shaped float. This one would represent a 34% decrease under our proposed plan. Here's another example. This dashed line represents a shared pier. As you can see, the pier itself pretty much splits the property line, and then the slips are in front of both properties, property 121 and 119. So just wanted to show what a shared pier looks like, and this would represent a 33% decrease. Here's another larger example of a shared pier where instead of having 2 homeowners, you'd have 4 homeowners who are collectively sharing their pier. Same scenario as the previous slide, and with a 37% reduction. And the reason why these percentages are different, just for clarification, is because everybody's pier is different. So there's many different configurations, and each little curve and corner either brings in or reduces the total square footage. Staff's recommended change number 3 is to provide a simplified permit for residential piers. Basically, it goes, we have reduced it to essentially a one-page permit, which we heard loud and clear from the folks during the look-back workshops, that why can't we have a simplified pier permit? And so we think we've achieved that. We've clarified some language in there, and we've added language regarding the city's intent to renew the pier. There was some discussion on that point. Will this pier be renewed each year? And I think we've clarified that. Another important component of this is to offer either a 5 or a 10-year permit. Many people have come to us saying, you know, or maybe they'd like to sell their house, or they're buying a house, and it's daunting if when I talk to them and they say they only have a 1-year permit, and the lender sometimes has to dig a little deeper, and we usually talk, and I assure him that the pier will be there and they'll have a permit the following year, but sometimes lenders need a little bit more. They need to feel better about the transaction that they're financing. So a 5 or 10-year permit might help in that case. The fourth recommendation is to redesignate some of the HOA piers from commercial to residential. Now, the caveat with that would be that if an HOA is only allowing its homeowners, to use the marina, then the recommendation would be to charge them for the residential rate, because essentially it's a collective residential use. But if that particular marina allowed folks from the public to rent a slip at their marina, then in essence they'd be operating as a commercial marina, and then the commercial rates would apply to that marina. Remember, we have 2 commercial rates. We have either a small commercial rate, which are all the marinas that are under 15,000 square feet, and we have a large commercial rate, which are the marinas that are over 15,000 square feet. So a few piers that would be affected, and I'll show them, are Beacon Bay and Lido Isle. Here's an example of the Genoa East and West piers at Lido Isle on Via Lido Sud, and this graph shows how they're depicted now under their current rules as commercial. And for the members in the audience and the City Council, when you're a commercial pier, you're charged for the entire, and for lack of a better term, I call it the entire box of water in front of your property. Basically, it goes from side property line to side property line, from bulkhead line to pier head line, creating a box. And so for the commercial piers, we charge for that box of water, paying no attention to the configuration of the actual pier itself. And the reason for that is because every commercial marina can build as many slips as many or as few slips as they want to fill into their box of water. So this is what it would look like, but under the proposal, the pier, that box that is hashed right there, would disappear, and we would be charging for the pier, the gangway, and the float, plus the 10-foot buffer area. Here's another example of Lido Isle community pier at a street end. And the same scenario. There's the box, but that could change to just the outline of the pier, therefore significantly reducing the square footage that we'd be charging Lido Isle. One of the trickier ones that I frankly don't have an answer, this is another example of Beacon Bay, and Beacon Bay would also be charged just for their slips. And actually, it looks like they already are, so maybe this slide is in error for them. But one of the questions that I would have for council this afternoon would be how to classify the Lido Isle Community Association Clubhouse/Yacht Club. As I understand it, the clubhouse is used for dual purposes. not everybody on Lido Isle is a member of the yacht club, as I understand it, and I could be corrected. Therefore, the clubhouse has a dual purpose. So the question is, do we charge as we do for the other yacht clubs in the harbor, which is a commercial pier at the low rate? I think the low rate is about $1.02 per square foot because they're educational, they're visitor serving, and so on and so forth. They're not part of that commercial tier under 15,000, over 15,000 rate. So, do we charge the Leica pier, the commercial or residential rate? That would be a question for the City Council to help us as we move forward.
I'm not clear, Chris. Are you saying that they rent slips?
No, they don't. This pier right here is used 100% for sailing instruction and very short-term visiting yachts. Either they're Leica members yachts that are keeping them there for a night or two, or their friends, reciprocalities between yacht clubs where they might be there for a day or two or a few days. But basically, the boats that you see at this dock right here are either there for the day, just happen to be there when the aerial photograph was taken, or they're just for a very short period of time. So there's no permanent berthing here.
All right. Yeah, and you said that not every not every resident is a member of the yacht club, but are there non-residents who are members of the yacht club?
I think that would be, I would guess not, but I would let the members from Leica answer that question.
Thank you.
Chris?
Yes.
Could the Lido Island Association tear down those floats and build as many floats or docks as they would choose to within the prolongation of the property lines?
It's interesting you should raise that question because they are currently rebuilding this entire structure right now. They're rebuilding it in essentially the same configuration with some just minor changes that are hardly noticeable, but they're there.
But your definition or the purpose of the box, as you called it, or the prolongation of the property lines, what I heard you say was that was instituted for the sole purpose that commercial docks can be reconfigured and have as many as they choose within that boxed area. Is that condition present for the Lido Island example?
In theory, if they wanted a marina there as designated as a commercial pier, they could tear this down and build a 30-slip marina.
Chris, you asked opinion. My opinion is if they're not using it for rental and it's used purely for educational and for homeowner visitation, then I would charge them the residential rate.
Well, it's pretty clear to me that this dock is not being used for revenue-generating purposes, renting out slips to the public, if you will, like a commercial pier would. So it's pretty clear to me that this shouldn't be considered to be a commercial pier. But I guess my question is, we do have other yacht clubs in the harbor, and as far as I know, we treat them pretty consistently. And is the usage of this space generally similar to how Balboa Yacht Club or Newport Harbor Yacht Club would use the pier area in front of their facilities? Do you have any? Is there any distinguishment there that's of significance? Because they all participate in educational and public service, activities. So
they do. The closest comparison that I can think of the major yacht clubs in the harbor would be Balboa Yacht Club, which has a dock right in front of their clubhouse, and it is solely for instructional use and visiting vessels, very short term. So it closely matches this. Bahia Corinthian Yacht Club is currently under a lease with the city, and Newport Harbor Yacht Club, if I recall, they have a large property, and we've divided their property into uses. So on the east side of the property, they have a marina. it is a marina. If I'm not mistaken, I have to check my notes, but I believe we're charging them the small commercial marina rate for that portion. But for the instructional main dock area, we've divided that off into the lower rate that a visiting or instructional serving yacht club would have. So I think that's how we've parsed it out.
Which is, just to be refresh on the difference is it's $1.02 for if it's classified as educational, public service support kind of thing, and it's
about $1.35 for the small marina, and about $1.65 for the large marina.
And Balboa Yacht Club is charged at the $1.02 rate for the space in front of their
Yes.
facility.
Well, they have a mix of city tidelands and county tidelands, and there's very little city tidelands. But I guess in theory, to answer your question, yes. The dock itself is actually over county tidelands. We don't charge for them, but for the small sliver that's within city tidelands, we charge them that small.
$1.02.
Yeah, $1.02.
Okay.
I guess one of the differences, though, is that the yacht club has a mixture of marina and non-marina, and as I understand, Lido has only the non-marina activity. They don't have a marina associated with it that generates revenue. They don't generate revenue off of any of their water area, do they?
That is correct. That is correct. Newport Harbor Yacht Club does generate revenue off of their marina, but Balboa Yacht Club, just to distinguish, does not, because their marina, which is you would think belongs to the Balboa Yacht Club, actually belongs to the Irvine Company.
It's my understanding that part of their marina belongs to the Irvine Company, but not all of it.
Well, a very small percentage. Actually, all of the revenue generating, as I understand it, is to the Irvine Company, belongs to the Irvine Company. There's actually three not owners, but you've got Irvine in front of the Balboa Yacht Club. You've got Irvine Company, City Tidelands, and County Tidelands. So I think what I'm hearing with this is to change the Lido Clubhouse to residential. Is that the consensus? Thank you. Recommended change number 5. This is an anomaly in our formula. For very small piers, we would step down to the 2018 rent immediately. And I'm going to show this. This basically affects in Grand Canal, West Newport, and the Peninsula. And it's just I'll call it a quirk, for lack of a better word. When you have piers that are, I think it's 196 square feet and less, and all these piers here on the Grand Canal are less than that. So I took 210 Grand Canal, which is on the right side, at 126 square feet. And you can see the rate for 2013, 14, 15, 16 actually decreases. So we just figured, why go through the exercise? Let's just cut it right to the chase at 2017 rates and move on. Recommended change for number 6 would be to use and I have to be clear on how I describe this, the rental revenue derived from the Harbor Patrol when they rent moorings. Now that wasn't clear, but I'll show you. On the slide here we have H&J mooring field, and where the circles are you can see 2 white mooring cans that do not have a boat on them. That doesn't mean that there is not a mooring permittee associated with that. In fact, every single mooring in the harbor has a mooring permittee affiliated with it. When those moorings are vacant and a visitor comes to town from anywhere and they have a boat, they would go and check in with the Harbor Patrol, and they would ask the Harbor Patrol, can you give me anywhere to tie up my boat except for an anchorage? Some people don't like to use an anchorage. There's a free anchorage. So the Harbor Patrol would assign them to any one of these vacant moorings and charge a fee. During the wintertime, I think it's around $15 or $16 a night, and during the summertime, it's around $25, $26 a night. That adds up to approximately $80,000 per year, plus or minus, depending on the season and that year. So there's a lot of people who visit Newport and who come and use our mooring systems. As a side note, I hope that with our new marina park, we could fill up our marina with our visitors serving marina with these folks who are on the moorings. So the proposal here would be to use that revenue for mooring amenities or other beneficial harbor programs. Keep it in the harbor. My last slide is really just a chart that's also in my staff report, and I'd be happy to talk
Yes,
about...
I'm sorry, let me interrupt.
Sure.
On this last point on the moorings, to be a little more clear, the revenue that would be collected would be used, an equivalent amount would be used for mooring-specific amenities in the harbor.
Or other beneficial harbor programs. And if you have the logic for that was if you have $80,000, it might be challenging to find a way to spend $80,000 every year. So
to the extent that there are appropriate projects, it would be dedicated to projects that would be mooring related, but obviously we'd reserve the right if there were not in any given year sufficient projects being pursued, then it would be used for other harbor amenities.
Yes.
Okay.
One example might be looking outside of the water onto land. Maybe there's a public restroom that could be rebuilt after saving for a number of years. Something along those lines, as an example. And I believe this is my last slide, which really shows the comparisons that we used or that we looked at that State Lands is implementing for various locations in California. And you'll notice that in Lake Tahoe they charge what they call an impact area, which is typically 10 feet around the pier, a.k.a. that would be a buffer area. And then all the notes on the right-hand side. Huntington Harbor, they charge for the entire water area, or that box of water that I was referring to earlier. Sacramento River and San Joaquin Delta, they charge the buffers, but only on the river side of the dock, where you can put a boat. They wouldn't charge for the, quote, bank side, which cannot, in some cases, or maybe most, I'm not sure, accommodate a boat. If it did, they would charge for that. State Lands typically has 10-year leases with staggered renewal dates. So new rental rates would take effect when leases expire. That's just from our phone call to the State Lands folks. I think. So that's my last slide, and I'd be happy to answer any questions and
So on that last slide, you charged, we saw that the preponderance was charging for the entire buffer area, the entire 10-foot buffer area. There was one example of State Lands where that was discounted at the 50% level. So staff is selecting the comparator here that has the discount associated with it.
Correct. That would be the first example of Lake Tahoe, where they charge 79 cents a square foot for the actual pier, plus half of that 79 cents for the impact area, a.k.a. the buffer area.
Right.
Okay, questions for staff? Bill.
I have some comments I'd like to make. Going back to our original purpose of starting this exercise, dealing with the responsibility of meeting the constitutional conditions placed upon us by the Tidelands operations and that type of thing. I understand the importance of that and understand the foundation of that. It also seems that this, just even when we try to make it simpler, it even becomes more complex. And I would ask my colleagues their opinion of us charging the appraised prices that we determined were legitimate for the pier or dock area and the gangway to it, and the U or captured water that exists where there are the U-shaped docks, but none of the buffer. And my logic on that is, and I don't have a lot of experience with other harbors, but it seems that there's a unique aspect of our harbor compared to Lake Tahoe, certainly compared to the rivers, is that we have a lot of small boat or small floating device operations in our harbor that really resonate with me as the argument that one person made during this last go-around of, they showed pictures about, tell me how this 10-foot buffer is mine. Everybody in the world uses it. And when I look at especially your second slide or page 52 in your report, it's just hard to say that those side lines are not arbitrary. In one case they're rounded, the next case they're not. They're 3/8, they're 8/4, they're 4/5, they're 10. And I recognize that there was absolutely logic for every one of those lines that you drew, but it's hard to say that it just doesn't look like it's absolutely arbitrary, and requires an absolute unique decision on each one. I think that, and I recognize that if we go the route of not charging for the buffer, that we're reducing the revenue. But to me, this has never been about the revenue. It's about meeting the state tidelands requirements and keeping the state tidelands out of our hair so they don't come in and do as they do in Huntington Harbor and just draw a box and say that's what it's going to be, and then we lose the revenue on top of it. And so I think that the administrative costs almost would be offset by what we would lose in revenue. Because we're talking about a couple $100,000. And so my position would be, let's eliminate the buffer with the exception of that which is inside the U. That to me is totally captured space. No one goes inside that U. Some people even have a line across it. That U and the docks and the gangways would be charged at the 52, 5, 6, 7 cents, whatever it is, and we would keep it clean in that manner. That would be my position.
Any other comments? Mr. Hand.
Yeah, I think it's fair to have a full discussion of this issue, and so I'll offer a counterpoint. The city acts in a fiduciary capacity on behalf of the state of California in managing the tidelands. And the fundamental authority at the state level is the State Lands Commission. State Lands Commission directly manages pier rentals in areas not including Newport Harbor, as we saw on this example. That's still up on the screen. And I think it's unwise of us to go far afield from the methodology employed by state lands, because my view is we've arrived at a solution here that is a good and perhaps advantageous one for the residents of Newport Beach as compared to how this might be managed by state lands if they came in. And so, as you can see, the preponderance of methodology here at the state lands level is to use this 10-foot buffer. And in one case, we have an example of discounting that buffer by 50%. And so I see precedent there that makes sense to just go to the 50% charge. And that keeps us in contact with methodology employed by state lands. I agree, it's not about the revenue that the city collects. We've already established that the revenue that we collect from these pier rentals, the increased revenue, will go to capital uses in the harbor. So we know whatever money is collected is going to go to the benefit of the harbor and all users of the harbor. As it relates to the administrative cost, we've already been through the exercise of drawing these lines, there's no additional cost associated with simply changing the calculation of discount. I mean, we've gone through the pain here. We've been through it with every pier owner. And I guess the only change that we're talking about that would cause some amount of work is this elimination of this not charging for the 5-foot buffer. You'd have to go through and have another look at them, but I have to believe that wouldn't take very long. And it's basically a one-time exercise. You do it once, review it with the homeowner, and you're done. So unless something changes with the pier. As it relates to the use of the water, it's true that the pier owner does not have exclusive use of the buffer area around the pier. On the other hand, effectively, let's talk about how these piers are used. I think on a small percentage of the piers, there is no boat. Some homeowners don't have a boat, therefore there is no boat. On the other hand, those homeowners could change that anytime they wish by buying a boat and putting it on the pier, and I think that's a small percentage. So the great preponderance of pier owners have boats. Those boats are tied to their piers. My guess is those boats are tied to the pier 90% or more of the time. I mean, homeowners do use their boats, but when you figure the boat's tied up there most every night, all night, and all during the week, most weeks, I mean, it's not hard to get to a view that it's 90% or more of the time. So effectively, there is exclusive use of at least some water area around the pier. And I recognize that for us to try and do this individually with each pier owner, the size of their boat, whatever, it becomes administratively untenable. So my view is that discounting it by 50%, which, as we've seen, is a significant reduction in charge in the range of 25 to 33% in the examples that we saw, is a reasonable outcome as it relates to the exclusive use of water issue. And so for those reasons, I feel pretty good about going forward with this 50% discount idea on the buffer. And I do think, by the way, these other changes that staff is recommending are excellent changes, particularly the willingness to extend a 5 or 10-year permit. By the way, by way of clarification, that would be a 10-year permit, but the permittee would pay the rate that other annual permittees would pay. Is that right? I mean, it would be calculated in the same way as everyone else's charge. So, I think, and the simplification of the pier permit, et cetera, I really like the idea of using the mooring revenue, the rental revenue, for the benefit of moorings and otherwise for the benefit of the harbor. So I think overall these are an excellent set of recommendations and feel good about the 50% charge.
All right, if there's any other council comments, if not, we'll open it up to the audience. All right, let me open the public comment period. Anyone who'd like to speak on this matter, please come forward. You'll have 3 minutes. Please state your name. Yes, sir.
My name is Fred Barnes. I'm president of the board of directors of the Lido Isle Community Association, and we appreciate the work done by the staff and most of the outcome. Just to tell you, give you an aspect of the importance to us, we have 9 board members, and every one of them are here, and our manager is here, the association. So you have a letter that we sent a few days ago, and I hope you all had a chance to look at it. I don't want to add anything to it, but I would like to point out a couple of things in it, along with what Councilman Hill said. Levying a fee on a 10-foot swath that is only used sporadically to load and unload residents' boats seem to be overreaching and unfair. That is doubly true when you consider that the boat owners doing the loading and unloading are already subject to the city's tidelands fee at another location where their boats are permanently docked. Another point I'd like to highlight is that we've been paying the increased tidelands fee.
Could you speak more? I'm having a hard time hearing. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? Sorry. We have been paying the increased tidelands fee at a commercial rate since beginning of March, I believe it was, and we believe that any adjustments should be made retroactively to that, so that the adjustment for us being residential versus commercial, that difference we should get benefit for. Thank you. Have any questions of us?
Thank you, sir. Next speaker, please.
While the next speaker is coming up, I guess I would just offer an opinion that the adjustment retroactively from commercial to residential rate, I think, is an appropriate thing to do in this circumstance. So.
Thank you and good evening, Mr. Mayor, honorable council members. My name is Kevin Muldoon. I'm local legal counsel for the Claremont Institute. It's a property rights nonprofit. We wanted to vocalize our opinion about the Beacon Bay bill. Such bill was only intended to apply to require fair market rent because it mentioned specific plots that were not submerged. These real property parcels are referred to in the bill. Quote, the city may lease the lots located within parcels A, B, and C. It continues, the consideration to be received by the city for such leases shall be the fair market value of such lots as finished subdivided lots with streets constructed and all utilities installed. From prior to the Beacon Bay bill's passage in 1978, up until the change we are here discussing today, Newport Beach Municipal Code, case law, and legislation at the state level allowed recreational piers to exist in Newport Harbor without any rent. The passage of the 2011 Pavley Bill put an end to rent-free recreational piers located in waterways managed by the State Lands Commission, but not to rent-free recreational piers located here at Newport Harbor, because the harbor is managed by the City of Newport Beach. As trustees of the harbor, this honorable council is not bound by the Pavley Bill, nor is it required to charge any rent, let alone a fair market value rate. Lastly, a fiduciary duty to charge rent does not simply arise because the state decided to change their policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon or good evening, Mr. Mayor, honorable members of the City Council. My name is Stephen Barrick. I'm General Counsel for the Newport Beach Dock Owners Association. Initially, I'd like to start by thanking this council and the staff for putting together this meeting so we could discuss this issue that is extremely important to my clients. I appreciate the opportunity to address you this evening. Again, thanks again for bringing this issue back to the citizens of Newport Beach's attention. But as I was sitting there and listening to the comments of staff, comments of the council, comments of Mayor Pro Tem Hill, who I thought brought up a point regarding the arbitrariness of this entire process and the concerns in light of that, it seems that this process has raised more questions than it has answered. My clients have always been willing to work through these issues with the city and are looking forward to continue this process over the next several weeks. However, we remain gravely concerned about several outstanding issues regarding potential property rights issues, taxation issues, and the arbitrariness of the initial process that led to where we are here today, namely the issues that we have concerns with that violated the Brown Act, in our opinion. We are hoping to continue to have discussions with the members of the staff for the next several weeks, but our litigation continues to go forward, and we hope to potentially resolve this issue over the next little while. But I want to make perfectly clear to staff and members of the council that the fact-finding process of our litigation will commence in very short order, including the noticing of depositions, the conducting of discovery, and the hope that we could have a resolution that is both favorable to the people of Newport Beach, but also to my clients. Thank you so much for your time.
Next speaker, please.
Hello, council members. My name is John Gunderson, and I wanted to know if the permits for the moorings.
Actually, yeah, this is a taller microphone over here.
Whether the permits for the mooring and the docks are of the same over tideland, and if
Sir, if you'd wait just a minute, we can, is it on? Chris, is the microphone turned on?
Oh.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so I was wondering if the permits were the same as for the docks and the moorings, and also if you could extend the mooring length of time where they could be traded. I think it was 10 years, now we're down to 7 years, and it seems that we should be treated pretty much the same as the dock people for the duration, and it greatly cuts into the value of the moorings. When you restrict them, there's 2 more times that you can sell them before it comes up on the 7-year period. And I can remember going to a council meeting about 50 years ago, and they were going to limit the amount of time you could sell your mooring. And he says, if you don't allow me to sell it, I'll just die with it, and the tidelands won't be able to be used by anybody. So I was hoping that there would be an extension on that, and it could be maybe in perpetuity. You could trade those instead of a 5 or 10 year or 7 year. And that's my question, if you can respond to that.
No, thank you, sir. It's not a back and forth. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, honorable members of the council. I want to thank you for having this look-back period and for the staff actually looking at some of the issues that we've been faced with, particularly the uncertainty that's been created by this entire procedure. Uncertainty, as you know, has been affecting the market values of the homes, and while we're very happy that the council is looking at a 5 or 10 year permit, most lenders are looking for something beyond that.
Could you give your name, please?
Oh, I'm sorry, Christine Baggett on behalf of the Newport Dock Owners Association. Specifically, the lenders are looking for a commitment on price as well as a commitment on terms. The problem that we've been faced with, as you know, the council can change the price at any time, that this council's basis is not necessarily binding on next year's council, and that has created uncertainty in the marketplace, which has hurt all of us. We look forward to working with council. I have not seen, or with staff, I've not seen the new one-page permit, but I think that provided that the terms in it are simpler than the old ones, provided that the confiscation issues are eliminated, I think that that is definitely a step in the right direction. We also understand that staff has been in communication with the assessor's office with respect to possessory interest tax issues. We do not know the outcome of that, but that's something that we all need to be sensitive to, that a new tax is not created with the assessor's office. As you know, we already are paying taxes on the value of the dock from the purchase of the home. And while we look forward to working with you, we hope that all of these issues will be kept in mind. We hope that what has happened in the marketplace with the uncertainty on the right to the docks, on the price for the docks, will be taken into account in the new permit and will be looked at with all issues still open on those. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Honorable Mayor and City Council, my name is Patricia Newton, and I'm a mooring permittee. The analysis I sent to staff after the workshop are in the attachment A, and I've read the full staff report. There's significant issues and omissions in the staff report. Inconsistencies among the harbor use categories are the result of the sequential decision-making process and disparate methodologies used. Number one, the application of fair market value for deriving rents on tidelands is not used consistently. The mooring fees were not based on appraisals, as in the case of other user groups. The use of the Marina Index results in inequitable pricing for mooring permittees. Number 2, there are marked variations as to what is deemed a gift of public funds and what the city's obligations are under the Tidelands Trust. The rules were changed because it was decided the transfer of mooring permits was a gift of public funds. This is inconsistent, given that the residential piers are freely traded with the sale of property and the capital gain accrued to the seller. Residential pier permittees, contrary to mooring permittees, now have the right to charge rents, a profitable bonus for the homeowner. Surely this is a gift of public funds. I analyzed mooring charges versus residential piers using information from study sessions and estimated the cost of such as property tax and the amortized cost of an acquired mooring permit. Costs accumulated to 2020 for a mooring permittee is a loss of $80,738. Rental income from a residential pier could result in a profit of approximately $139,300 over the same period, excluding potential capital gains. By 2017, the annual fee for a 50-foot mooring is $3,260 versus $1,000 for a residential pier, and the footprint on the Tidelands is approximately 750 square feet versus 1,900 square feet for the pier. The disparity in these charges and profit potential is not supportable and is not addressed in the staff report. The financial impact on mooring permittees is greater and the benefits less than for those other use categories. The city collects rents on moorings which are paid for and maintained by permittees. While it's proposed those funds now be earmarked, there's no guarantee it will benefit mooring permit holders and is another example of inequitable practices. Providing a forum for discussion is insufficient if the issues are not reasonably resolved or explained as to the disparate and unfair treatment. I respectfully ask the Council to eliminate the use of the Marina Index as a basis for assessing mooring fees in favor of a Tidelands appraisal, and to reinstate the Harbor Commission recommendation with respect to allowing mooring permits transfers. I also request a written answer to the inconsistencies described herein and the rationale for such disparate treatment of Tideland use categories. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Mayor, members of the City Council, good afternoon, good evening as it is. I'm Pete Paulette, a resident of the Balboa Peninsula since 1940, off and on. Haven't been here before. Pretty nice digs you work in. Not a surprise, I guess, since the original concept of the City Hall costing $30 million from cash on hand morphed into $250 million worth of debt for the City of Newport, all without appropriate voter approval. What about $35 million in new debt we keep hearing about for the new marina? No wonder you have chosen to attack the citizens' bank accounts with this odious dock tax. And that's not the worst of it. The new permit is, however. That permit allows you to confiscate our property for a cause. Can someone define for a cause for us, please? Sounds discretionary and subjective. You're undermining our real estate values. You should scrub this ill-conceived program and start over by engaging the 1,100 impacted property owners. We already pay a property tax on the headlands, more property tax on the increased value from our piers and docks, in some cases a possessory interest tax as well, and finally an annual permit. You already participate in all of these revenue sources. When is enough enough? You want more now, plus the right to steal our property if you find fault with our maintenance? We are passionate about this. We worked for what we have and resist your efforts to devalue our assets. I will remind you that yesterday was Veterans Day. Many of us in this room served our country to preserve our constitutional rights. That includes stopping you from confiscating our assets. Have any of you served in the United States military? If not, I guess I can understand your disdain for our individual rights. You never worked to protect them. We can forgive Mr. Petros and Ms. Daigle. Mr. Petros wasn't a party to this mess, and Ms. Daigle opposed the ordinance, but the rest of you, not so much. In the end, I expect you to treat us the way you treat Jim Mosier, a very bright guy who has simply become a thorn in your sides. You hear him, but you don't listen to him. He's one voice, we are 1,100. You should listen to all of your constituents. You can start by throwing out this new permit and negotiating fair revisions with the mooring lessees, the businesses, and the dock owners of our community. I implore you to do that.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, City Council members. My name is Stacy Klein, and many of you know me involved in the bike community, but I'm also a mooring permit holder, and I just would like to implore you, the only thing that I would like to ask is to allow us to transfer our moorings. I understand as a teacher that, my salary is based on taxes, and, I don't want to make any ad hominem attacks on why we shouldn't raise our taxes. I would just like to be able to transfer my mooring. It took me many years to jump in the boat there and buy or to get a mooring permit, and to not be able to transfer that now is terrifying to me. Especially since many of us went in with the advice of the Carver Patrol or the Sheriff's Office, and thinking that this was the way we get a mooring. And so, if you guys could keep that in mind, that many of us are devoted to our boats, but maybe we may not need to keep them forever. It'd be really helpful if we could transfer that. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Next speaker. Any other speakers?
Good evening. Brian Ozonian, mooring permittee and dock permittee. So let me briefly on the mooring. I have an idea on how to use the $80,000, Chris, or Mr. Miller. How about kicking half of it back to the people that own the mooring and pay the maintenance? I don't know if this crowd knows, but Harbor Patrol will designate one of these empty moorings, collect all the fee, and we pay all the maintenance, which is required every 2 years, and then we pay, I think it's bi-monthly, we pay a rental fee. So we're paying all the fees, and we get nothing back. So there's a suggestion. On the pier, my request is that you make any transfer fees within families zero, so that family to families can be like the moorings, free family to family. Now, on the buffer area, we have a situation where enforcement of that buffer area should be taken up and discussed and implemented. Harbor Patrol doesn't know what to do. We have people at night with headlamps that just look right into the house, and they sit there and fish all night. I mean, all night. They don't know how to handle this. They do not patrol it because they can go right by. In fact, I'm wondering what they are patrolling. Those diagrams for buffer areas, imagine fences and it's your backyard, because we're paying for that property or we're paying for its use, but there's no enforcement. We pay, anybody can play. So there's a disparity, which is why I'm encouraged that Mayor Pro Tem Hill is talking about just the dock, because it's literally impossible to do that enforcement. I don't want to be the one that goes out and shoos them away. When kids come on the property and go along the shoreline looking for seashells, I don't want to shoo them away. But this whole process is aggravating in that we have a disparity. Now, this little child that comes along one day may drown. Who's responsible for that? We, I'm assuming, now have additional liabilities for this buffer area, and I'm sure most of us are insurance bear to personal liability and property claims. So how will we handle that? Now, to make it simple, I'm all in favor of it. It seems pretty simple. If someone jumps on the dock is part of our problem, and it's probably insured. But to try to convince an insurance company when there's a claim that someone drowned in the buffer area and that you must indemnify me, the property owner, pretty dicey. Be a pretty good argument. I don't know that there's any precedent for that. Maybe the statewide study that's been done can address it. But how do we enforce and how do we insure? And lastly, I'll say, of the money that's collected, can you name one benefit that I, as a dock permittee, gets from these funds? Just one.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker. All right, seeing no other speakers, you can speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Council. My name is Scott Piotr. I know that we're not going to have a removal or a repeal of the dock tax, although we should. And I know that you're not going to change what you're charging, although you'll play with the areas and try to redefine them and make them work. But being in real estate for the past 30 years, probably the biggest killer, especially on the residential docks, is going to be the property rights, even if they're leasehold rights. Property rights used to be assumed that they were going to be owned by the headlands and that there was a permit fee. Everybody can relate to the permit fee, even though inspections were seldom, if ever, performed. But now it's clear that the state owns it, the city's enforcing it, and that the property owners don't have any rights. And even the leasehold rights seem very fuzzy and non-determined. It seems clear that by having some sort of specified leasehold right, perhaps in perpetuity, subject to the conditions of payment, inspections, and other things that are clearly defined with an administrative review panel, would be appropriate. And at least the homeowners, the headland owners, would feel like they've got rights that aren't going to be taken away as long as they perform. Today, that's not the case. That's all I had. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to bring it back to the City Council. Councilmember Gardner?
Well, I was just wondering, did staff take a lot of notes? Are there things that they want to respond to?
Well, I did take some notes, and I can address some of them.
Okay, because I was taking notes as well, and it's
So was I.
okay.
Let's hear what you got to say, Chris.
Okay. Let's see. Fred Barnes was talking about residential, commercial. There was Mr. Gunderson was talking about requesting more time to sell his mooring. If you recall, there's about 7 years left. The council gave 10-year period that they can buy. A mooring can be transferred twice within that period. And he'd like more time, but just wanted to clarify that.
So that was also responsive to the lady that wanted to be able to transfer her mooring. She can.
She can for another 7 years, if my memory, yes. But after that time, she wouldn't.
Okay.
One speaker mentioned somebody who said he would die with his mooring, and if that were the case, he would revert back to the city and go to the next person on the wait list. Talking about the uncertainty in the marketplace and the fees and how they were generated, I will let others speak to that. Give to public, buy and sell. It is true that a mooring permittee is required to maintain their moorings every 2 years, and they get a letter from the Harbor Department saying so. The reason is because moorings deteriorate in the salt water, and that is a fee that ranges in every 2 years depending on what needs to be done, from a complete overhaul to just a few minor things. And as I described in my PowerPoint, the mooring permittees, I didn't say this specifically, but they cannot rent their mooring individually for a long term. They can do it on a very short term basis, 30 days. But it's the Harbor Patrol at the city's direction who can rent their moorings. So there was a good point there. There was some talk about transfer fees. within the family. I don't believe we are charging for transfer fees. So if you want to put your house into a family trust, we wouldn't charge a fee for an inspection for that. The area of liability, I'm not qualified to speak on that. I'll reserve that to the city attorney.
Chris, on the permit,
Yes.
do we have any copies of the proposed changed permit here tonight?
It's in the staff.
I thought
It is.
so. I didn't want to look at the right then. The concern about the confiscation, wasn't that language removed?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Let's be clear about that. That language was removed from the permit.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Property rights. Those are my notes that I can speak to.
Just a question for the city attorney. The gift of public funds that was mentioned, is that something we need to come back and look at, or?
Well, I mean, I think, it's something we've said several times. The city has an obligation to charge fair market value for the property. It's, Thailand's held in trust for the people of the state of California, and we have an obligation to charge fair market value for the use of that property.
And then just a couple of general comments, this is saying, the next year's council, that's true of almost everything we do. A future council can make all sorts of changes, so we do our best and say this is what we're trying to put into place, but there could be a turn. And listening to residents, I think the fact that we had those meetings and we have proposed changes suggests we're listening. Listening doesn't necessarily mean always agreeing, but I think we have shown that we were listening because we have tried to propose some changes in response to what we heard.
Mr. Mayor, just a couple of items very briefly. I was nodding my head when we were talking about the Lido Island Community Association and treating them as a residential peer owner for the rate structure, so that would be I would support that. I can appreciate Mr. Henn's consideration of the buffer area, but I more and more am compelled by what I heard from my colleague, Mayor Pro Tem Hill, and I'm sorry if I'm going to rough your name up, but Mr. Rizzoni, on the issue of the buffer. I don't believe now that we should be charging for it, the half of 50% of that 10-foot buffer. I believe that this is something that should be restricted to the property that is static, stationary, that I can look at and walk out and say there is always something there and not. I think the notion that whether a vessel is there taken to the extreme, if the vessel is on the water in the bay at any place, then we should be charging it as it motors around the bay. I mean, that would be the absurdity.
I think we figured out all our financing for the next century.
Thank you. So I am compelled to follow Mr. Hill's suggestion. And when this does come back to the council, I am very interested to hear what the last speaker, I believe it was Mr. Rizzoni again, saying, what are the benefits? I would like to see a list or some type of idea of what we are ready to invest these harbor fees in. I understand that, but I would like to see it all presented out there so that there is some surety that, in fact, it is going to be spent within the harbor, because that's been our promise. Finally, Mr. Piotr brings up a leasehold right. I'm interested to know what that leasehold right would imbue versus the risks of any possessory interest. Is that something, I'm not an expert on that, I don't know really much about it, saying those words even frightens me. Would we be creating a problem by virtue of trying to provide some type of property right? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Henn?
Yeah, first off, there never was a property right to the water that's owned by the state of California. Is that correct?
That's right. It is
Yeah.
owned by the state of California.
There never has been. For the last 100 and however many years, or 80 years since the harbor was created. So what we have done with these actions here hasn't changed that issue at all. There never was a property right. What we're doing here does not confer a property right. On the other hand, I think this issue of removing the language about the potential for confiscation of the pier and offering a 5 or a 10-year permit, I think that plays to the issue of financeability. And let's also be clear here, prior to all of this coming up, the residential pier owners had an annual permit. They never did have anything that was of value to a lender in terms of a surety of possession on that, over that water. So what we're doing here is only making it better than it was. And so, as it relates to the issue of property rights. So, I think that that's pretty clear. The one gentleman raised this issue of mooring permits and the possibility of getting, in effect, a forever mooring permit. I'll just offer my personal view that I don't think that's a possibility here. We went through careful consideration of mooring along with the rest of them, and I think we ended up in a good spot there with this 10-year transfer right period to get this thing into a more standard posture. As it relates to the additional personal liability, this idea that there might be additional personal liability associated with the buffer area, I recognize that our city attorney does not represent an individual citizen, and you may have a little bit of reticence about, making a legal opinion on that, but it's pretty clear to me that the establishment of a buffer zone for purposes of a fee or a rental doesn't imply that there is an aggregation of personal liability associated with that buffer area. You want to offer any thoughts on that, Aaron?
Yeah, without providing legal advice to the people here who are in this situation, how the rent is calculated should have no impact on the overall liability for the area at issue.
Okay. As it relates to the issue that there may be nuisance activity of people using water next to piers that are owned by residents, Chris, do you have any, we do have Harbor Patrol, we do have the ability to deal with nuisance activity. Do you have anything to offer in response to that concern?
All I can say is that we can talk to the Harbor Patrol, and if someone calls, we can ask the Harbor Patrol to keep an eye out and to assist the resident in that regard. But I don't know if every single Harbor Patrol is a Harbor Patrol person is up to date on all the issues that we're talking about here, but I can do my best to try and educate them.
Yeah, I think it would be worthwhile to meet with Harbor Patrol on the issue of nuisance enforcement and see if we can get a more clear understanding on that, and perhaps a procedure in place that for the benefit of residents where they do have nuisance activity in the water in front of their homes. And lastly, it was the gentleman that spoke on behalf of the Claremont Property Rights Group. Aaron, I think, was offering legal opinion about our responsibilities or the lack thereof as it relates to the ability to charge for the use of this public water. Do you want to offer any response to the comments that he made?
Well, just briefly, the passages from the Beacon Bay bill that he was referencing are very selective and deal with a very particular circumstance. There are other provisions in the Beacon Bay bill that impose an obligation on us to recover fair market value for basically the use of the titleland's property. And so I guess my overall thought about his comments was that he was very selective in the comments he was making.
That's all I had, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. comments? Well, I would just add my comments that, first of all, I think I support the recharacterization of the Lido Yacht Club, Lido Island Yacht Club. I think that's fully appropriate. I would say that the language about confiscation shouldn't have been in the document to begin with. I'm glad that we're taking that out, and I think the 5 or 10 year option for people is going to be very helpful. I think the important thing to note is that this action is reflecting the feedback that we got during the hearings that were held by the subcommittee, is reducing many of these fees by upwards of 30+%, which I think is a very significant concession to move forward on this issue. And obviously there are some folks here who still want to fight this issue back from last year, but we have moved on from that. So I think those would be my comments. With that, thank you for coming tonight.
Excuse me, do we have clarity on this issue of whether we're going to charge for the buffer zone? I think we need to get some clarity here from the group. We've heard some differing opinions.
And we don't have, I'm in favor of eliminating the buffer. That's fine with me. No, come on. I'm not playing to the crowd here. But that would be 3 of us. And we would always have 6, but we would need a 4th, so I don't know how much direction we can give staff at this point.
I actually, Councilmember, think Mr. Hill made some good points on that matter. I think there's a logic in eliminating the buffer zone. I frankly was talked out of supporting it by some of the comments from some of the people who spoke today. But given that, I think we should look at the language and how it can be recrafted, which would result in a further decrease in everyone's fees that I think addresses this in a very significant way.
So are you in favor of eliminating the charge for the buffer zone?
I am, yes. I think it ought to be revised in terms of how it's structured, because I think that's where the council's going on this. And frankly, when you look at the convoluted way that it was explained tonight, I frankly share some of the audience's confusion about how the formula was put together.
Just so we're clear then, what Mr. Hill suggested was no buffer zone, but he did include the center of the U. Is that consistent with what at least 4 people think? Thank you.
So,
yes.
And just to look back over my staff report, it appears that I have direction on all of the points that I made, the recommendations that I made. So the intent is to, if the council desires, to come back with a plan.
No, we'd come back with the actual ordinance.
Come back with an ordinance.
And one more clarification. Mr. Hill spoke of 50% of the U or the full rate for the U?
I had mentioned the full rate for the U.
Okay. I'm seeing heads nodding from Ms. Gardner, Mr. Curry. Yeah. Mr. Petros is not looking at me. But
yes. Okay. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yes. Mr. Mayor?
Sorry. We'll do that retroactively.
One other thing, Chris, that I think is owed as a courtesy. Ms. Dayton made some very, very well-thought remarks about the mooring, and she had asked, I believe, at the end of her comments for an opportunity to get a written response or some type of communication. Could you please extend her that courtesy?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So the intent is to bring this back to council at the next meeting, which is the 26th of November. Is that right, Mr. City Manager?
Well, it'll depend on if we can get the documents ready. So we'll
we'll shoot for that.
Yep.
For the first reading.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next item, Civic Center Community Room nonprofit use.
So somewhere in here is Laura Detweiler. I've asked Laura to make a presentation on this. There she is. We'll take a 2-minute pause as Chris changes the PowerPoint to Laura's.
Okay, are we ready to go?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I'm Laura Detweiler, Recreation and Senior Services Director. I also want to introduce Jonathan Harmon, Recreation Supervisor, who manages the Civic Center Community Room for us. So we've put together a brief presentation for you that will give you an overview of how we manage facility rentals and specifically the new Civic Center Community Room. So when we look at room rental prices, we look at comparable room sizes and capacity to other cities, and we also look at the costs associated with managing those facilities that will include direct, indirect, and cost recovery. In terms of costs related to the community rooms and really all of our facilities, we'll look at administration and event staffing, supplies, equipment purchase and replacement, and janitorial costs, as well as indirect costs, which are those cost allocation fees that you've been hearing about when you were reviewing the fire department fees. There are.
Could you remind us of the nomenclature on that? What's a CM fee?
So that would be the indirect cost would be associated with overhead and management of facilities, and although a very small portion of it, costs like that come from the city manager's office, my administration, human resources, building depreciation, those types of things.
CM stands for city manager's office.
I got it, yeah. A little slow.
So there are two policies that give us direction on management of facility rentals, one of them being cost recovery in Municipal Code 3.36, and it reads, the Municipal Code Section 3.6 provides that cost recovery for the facility rentals shall be 50%. And in our most recent study, which was about 3 years ago, our cost recovery for managing those facilities was at 48%. We will be reviewed in the next year, and that will give you an opportunity to adjust those rates as you see fit. The second policy is Council Policy B13, which talks specifically about facility rentals. It does say that fees may be charged for the use of city facilities and shall be established and periodically adjusted and approved by the City Council. It goes into specifics and says that fees are to be imposed to cover overhead, processing, deposits, and maintenance and replacement costs for the applications, scheduling, and maintenance of facilities. So this is an overview of our Civic Center community room rates and lawn rates. You'll see that we have 4 levels of rates: nonprofit, resident use serving organizations, which may be our AYSOs or private schools. We also have a private rate and commercial rates. And then on the left-hand side, you'll see that we offer also within those tiers a resident and non-resident rate. And that we have rates specifically for the community room, which is $120 an hour for resident nonprofits. Our youth-serving organization rate is reduced to $75 an hour, and then we go into our private and commercial rates. So far, to date, and the facility's been available since June of 2013, we've had 20 nonprofit rentals, 2 resident youth-serving organization rentals, 1 private, and 3 commercial. Then it goes on to illustrate our civic lawn rates, and we've had 3 nonprofit rentals as well as 1 private rental. So these room rental numbers that we're providing for you, those are rentals associated with fees, but I will share with you the room has been very busy. We've had over 110 reservations of the facility, which could be anything from city-run meetings, co-sponsored events, or events that were waived.
Do we have a minimum time? Can you do it just for the 1 hour?
We do have, in our policy, it does read a minimum of 2 hours, but we're very flexible with that, and we've allowed for 1 hour rentals. This will give you a snapshot view of the nonprofit room rental rates for a variety of our community centers. Oasis being the largest, starts at $135. Then you'll see the Civic Center Community Room at $120. The Civic Center Lawn, then our youth serving organization rates, and then our classrooms get lower as the smaller size in terms of how many persons they'll accommodate. And then we have an even lower rate at the very bottom there for some of our smaller community centers that we have. And then also we did some market comparisons for you just to give you an idea of what other facilities are available out there. And I'm hesitant to show this to you because these are baseline costs, whereas our costs are full service. That includes tables, chairs, audio, visual. It also includes the staff, whereas these are basic rates to get in the door. And in most cases, there will be additional rates tacked on top of that depending on what your setup needs and event needs are. The Coastline Community College room, that rate stands out. We did clarify with them that is a shell of a room, and so if you need tables, chairs, or anything like that, you'll need to bring that in on your own. So that concludes our report. We certainly seek your direction on how you'd like us to move forward, and we're here to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions for staff?
Well, there was mine that I was interested in because I didn't have a very good overall picture. And I know that a lot of people were excited, particularly nonprofits. They were thinking that there would be another room. But looking at the costs, it seems to me that we have, I think we're pretty fair because we really do give the nonprofits a break. And they have options as far as, my concern was really a lot of times about monthly meetings because it's hard for a lot of nonprofits to do it for 12 months. That's, $600 or something can be a lot for some of them for their budgets. But the fact that we also offer even better rates for our youth-serving organizations and everything. So off the top of my head, I don't think I'd make any changes.
I wouldn't either.
Yeah, it looks good to me. Any comment? Any public comments on this particular issue? Seeing none, I will close public comments. And is there public comment on any study session, regular meeting item, closed session items as appropriate?
Mayor Curry and members of the council, my name is Jim Mosier. This actually pertains to the earlier study session item about the harbor charges, but it's not really about harbor charges. And I wanted to remind you again that when you enacted the ordinance changing the permit structure in January of this year, I believe it was Ordinance 2013-1, there was slipped in there kind of like a rider to a congressional bill, an unnoticed change to the Harbor Code, which is currently found in subsection 1760.060E. And this was never brought to the council's attention in any staff report that this change was being made. And there's never been any explanation offered of why that change was made. And it says, commercial uses provided under this Title 17 being the entire Harbor Code, are exempt from any provision requiring involvement of the owner of long-term or long-term leasee of an abutting upland property. And the city attorney himself thought that needed some clarifying language. I think the intent of the clarifying language was to say that there was only to allow someone to apply for a permit, but once the application was being processed, that the interaction with neighboring abutting land might come into play, but it doesn't say that, and nobody understands what it means, but it's there. And so I think, like your other issues about the charges, this is another residue from the harbor charge update process that needs to be revisited at some time. And then the other comment was about the closed session. And I believe the city attorney normally attends your closed sessions to provide legal advice to you and to make sure that you don't stray from the cited topic allowing the closed session. And I just wanted to point out on this agenda, you have an item rather strange in which all of you will be instructing Councilmember Henn to enter into some private separate negotiation with the city attorney over his salary and fringe benefits. And I just hope the public can be assured that while you're having that discussion, the city attorney is not there advising you on that matter. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? All right, Mr.
The city attorney will not be sitting in on that discussion.
Mr. City Attorney, is there a closed session announcement? Or, I'm sorry.
No, on the other issue, there was something I brought up a couple of times during the process, and it just wasn't at that point. We were focusing on other things. But I would like clarification of what that means. Does it mean that anybody who wants to do a commercial can just ignore a residential person or something? So they don't have to do it tonight, but at some point in the near future.
Do you have any announcement?
Yes, the City Council will meet in closed session to discuss items 2A and B as set forth on the regular session meeting agenda, including meeting with labor negotiators Dave Kiff and Terry Cassidy regarding negotiations with all represented employees, and meeting with labor negotiator Councilmember Michael Henn regarding the contract with the city attorney. And as Councilmember Henn mentioned, I will not be participating in that part of the closed session, and neither will my staff be advising the City Council.
Thank you. We stand adjourned to closed session.
It's a labor of love. But you go to all the events, and you've been to all the collectors. I mean, you really worked at it. You came from not knowing a lot of people, and you decided I'm going to do this. Right. And you become friends with these people. And now they come for you first and foremost. They love the venue, but they come because of
See,
you.
when I'm getting a text on my phone saying Barry McGuire's not going to go to church because he's going to be on our stage.
Oh, don't tell anybody that.
You know.
But you had me do implications, so that was all right. But
Tell
no,
them
this
about
show,
the cars.
it
What do you
is,
see
you know,
here
this show is
today?
so amazing. Of course, we're here at the beach, you know. In Corona Del Mar, it didn't get any better than this. And you had General Lyon had one of his great World War II planes flying overhead, and the
That was
wonderful,
spectacular.
the whole beginning was great. But just walking this show every year, I have to tell you, it's not the biggest show. You know, it's not the biggest show.
It's
You only
not-
have so
it's
much
not a
property, but you have crammed every nook and cranny of this property with the coolest cars. And I like car shows that are eclectic in that they have, you know, if you go to what they call a mark specific show, it's a Corvette show, and every car there is a Corvette or a Mustang or a hot rod. After the first 20 or so, you don't enjoy them quite as much. But here, you have everything.
Everything.
You have some classics.
I think we have about 17 classes.
I was looking at a 1929 Auburn I'd never seen before that would win a Pebble Beach. I mean, it was definitely a Pebble Beach winner. And it's sitting here at your
That
front
makes
door.
me
Now, how did you get him here? Because you vet them, you encourage him to come down. He's been here before, and he loves this area. It's for anybody in Newport Beach. And you don't have to be a car guy. You just have an amazing experience to see some of the greatest cars ever made in impeccable condition.
Yeah.
You walk around, you have wonderful views.
And they all have a great history, don't they? These
Every
cars?
car, and you know what I like? The owners, they stay by their cars for the most part. So you can walk up and ask the dumbest question in the world. What is this? What year is it? What is that? What's that mean? Or what's that gadget? And they will just open up. They'll be so happy to tell you.
That's
you
what
get
they're
an
here
education.
for.
And this is Americana. You know, you can trace the history of this great country through its cars. And it's all here. And it's patriotic. It's wonderful. It's Corona Del Mar.
And you've been a great supporter. We thank you.
And it's a mile from my house, you know. So it's the best. You're the best.
Thank you.
Really can't thank you enough for it.
And thanks to the city of Newport Beach for
Absolutely.
allowing us to use this
Oh, my
lot. We've got our fire chief, our police chief, our mayor. They'll all
Everybody
be
there.
on stage
Absolutely.
picking their favorite
Yes,
cars.
they're here supporting us. That means so much.
Everybody sing along with the Newport Not so long, waiting for your call. Lord, I miss you. Waiting for your call, waiting for it all. Lord, I miss you. Yeah, 'cause they say, man, some Puerto Rican girls just dying to meet you. Gonna get a case of wine. We're gonna get down like we used to. Come on. I miss you. I miss you. Hey, hey. Oh, miss you, baby. Burning in my heart. Come on, feel Thank you. Rolling Stone. Thank you.
Some of you might be here and may not know who we are and what we do. We started here in Irvine out of Chalk Children's Hospital in 1982, and we have expanded across the country and have become an incredibly powerful institution funding research protocols around the world. So although we're having a great time today and there's amazing food and a great venue, just know that a portion of what you guys are doing here today goes back to